My name is Faye Shaw, and I'm 32 years old. On my wedding day, the two front row seats reserved for my family stayed empty through the entire ceremony. That morning, I called my mother from the bridal suite, certain there had been an accident on the highway. She laughed. "Oh, was that today? A trip sounded more fun." Behind her, I heard my sister laughing too. I said, "Okay, Mom." Nothing else. Then I posted one photograph. Me, in my wedding dress, with some very special guests. 6 hours later, my parents were standing at the orchard gate, pale as the frosting on my cake. And what they asked me to do next is the reason I'm telling this story. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where the people who were cropped out of the picture finally speak. If you've ever loved someone who lived for an audience, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. To explain those empty seats, I have to take you back to 2009. I was 15. There was a letter on our kitchen table in Albany with a bank's name on it and a date circled in red. My father had been laid off 8 months earlier. My mother sat at that table until 2 in the morning, and by sunrise she had built a blog. She called it, simply, The Shaws. Her first post was about the dinner we'd eaten that night. Boxed noodles, a can of tomatoes, a stick of butter she'd been rationing for a week, and a paragraph about turning hard times into warm ones. She photographed the pot with the good dish towel folded underneath it. The post went everywhere. Strangers wrote that she'd made them cry at their desks. A pasta company reached out within the month. The first advertising check arrived 3 days before the mortgage was due, and my mother held it with both hands, the way you hold something breathing. I want to be fair here, because fair matters. My mother didn't build a stage because she was vain. She built it because she was terrified, and the stage worked. The bank letter went into a drawer. The camera stayed on the counter. From then on, our house ran on a deal nobody ever said out loud. The audience saved us once, so the audience must never be allowed to leave. I was 15, and I watched fear put on lipstick and call itself a brand. It would take me 17 more years to understand what that rescue actually cost us. It cost us the table, the place where a family sits down and nobody is watching. And once the table was gone, the rest went quietly, one small absence at a time. By the time I was 16, our house had become a set. A ring light stood guard over the dinner table like a pale halo. Breakfast happened twice on Sundays, once for real, cold and rushed, and once for the camera, with steam my mother generated by microwaving a wet paper towel behind the syrup. My sister Kylie was 9, and she was magic on film. Big eyes, easy tears, a laugh that arrived on cue. I once watched my mother ask her to cry again because the first take had bad light, and Kylie did it. 9 years old, and she could summon grief twice before dinner. Me, I was 15 going on awkward. Braces, a bad perm, a habit of blinking exactly when the shutter clicked. Nobody ever sat me down and fired me from the family. It was gentler than that, which made it worse. I got assigned what my mother called logistics. Hold the reflector, Faye. Watch the schedule, Faye. Stand just out of frame, honey, you're casting a shadow. Episode by episode, comment by comment, I dissolved out of simply the Shaws the way a person dissolves out of an old photograph left in the sun. No announcement, no decision anyone had to defend. The followers who'd once asked about the older daughter simply stopped asking, and my mother never corrected the record. Here is the strange part, the part it took me years to say out loud to anyone. I didn't fight it. I organized it. I kept the shot lists. I charged the batteries. If I couldn't be in the picture, I would be the reason the picture existed, and I told myself that was the same thing as belonging. It isn't. But you don't learn that at 16. You learn it in a wedding dress, on hold, listening to a spa waterfall behind your mother's laugh. When I was 17, I won first place at the regional science fair. I'd spent 4 months on that project, a study on allergen labeling errors in school lunches, because even then, I was that kid. The auditorium had folding chairs and a banner and a judge who shook my hand with both of his. The seats I'd saved with my jacket stayed empty. My mother had promised they'd come, but a sponsor had shipped a box of curling irons that morning, and the light in Kylie's bedroom was, and I'm quoting, too good to waste. I drove home with a blue ribbon on the passenger seat like a hitchhiker I'd picked up out of pity. When I walked in, the whole family was clustered around Kylie's vanity filming her hair routine, and my mother waved me out of the mirror's reflection without looking away from the screen. Later that night, I found her in the kitchen backing up footage. I asked her quietly why she hadn't posted anything about the fair, not even a photo of the ribbon. And my mother looked at me with genuine kindness, the way you look at a child who hasn't learned the rules of the world yet, and she gave me the sentence that ran our family like a constitution. If it isn't posted, it didn't happen, honey, and nobody watches a ribbon. She patted my cheek and went back to her uploads. I stood there holding a prize for a project about things that get mislabeled, and I remember thinking, with the flat calm I'd later be paid to have in emergencies, that she wasn't being cruel. She was being accurate. In her universe, I had genuinely not happened. It took me 15 more years to test whether that universe had an exit. Every production needs a crew, and I became one person doing all of it, off camera, unpaid, essential. When my grandmother broke her hip the winter I was 19, I was the one who slept in the recliner beside her hospital bed because visiting hours don't photograph well, and my mother had a brand trip to a maple farm. When the channel's paperwork tangled itself into a knot of 1099s and sales tax, I was the one at the kitchen table with a calculator at midnight, teaching myself the difference between a gift and sponsored income. And when Kylie was 19 and got caught reselling the free products she'd sworn were her honest favorites, I was the one who wrote the apology, coached her delivery, and talked a furious brand manager off a ledge over speakerphone. The comments called it grace. It was me, holding a script. I kept their real life running so their fake one could shine. I thought that was love. I need you to understand that I wasn't a hostage. I was a volunteer, and that's harder to admit. Being needed was the one role nobody could crop me out of. My mother would squeeze my shoulder after I'd fixed something and say, "You're the spine of this family, Faye." And I would glow for a week on that one sentence like a phone at 2% finding a charger. A spine, if you think about it, is the part of the body you never see in the picture. It holds everything upright, and it only gets mentioned when it breaks. For 20 years, mine didn't. I filed. I nursed. I apologized on behalf of people who weren't sorry. And the whole time, an idea was quietly forming in me the way a diagnosis forms. The only person in this house without a role was me. Medicine was my door out, and I went through it the expensive way. Scholarships, loans in my own name, a used car with heat that worked on one setting, medical school at 22, pediatric residency in Burlington, Vermont at 26, attending by 29. My family attended none of it. My white coat ceremony happened, per the family constitution, not at all. But here's what did happen. My intern year, a 4-year-old boy came into the ER blue-lipped and swelling, anaphylaxis from a peanut hidden in a bakery cookie. His name was Theo. His mother, Marisol, was screaming in the doorway, and my hands were steady. And epinephrine did what it does. And 11 minutes later, that little boy was breathing and asking whether he could keep the sticker on his chest. Nobody filmed it. It remains the most important thing I have ever done. 2 years later, I was the one who looked at Theo's blood work and didn't like it, and I sat with Marisol through the word leukemia, and through everything that word drags behind it. Remember him. He matters later. Somewhere in those years, I met Ben Anderson, a bridge engineer who inspected the spans I drove over to work, which I found unreasonably romantic. On our third date, he pulled out a scratched film camera, the kind you wind with your thumb, and took exactly one picture of me laughing into my coffee. I asked why he didn't take more. He said, "Because you look down when you smile, not at the lens. One's enough." I married that sentence eventually. But first I had to learn what he'd seen in one frame, that I had spent my whole life around cameras, and not one of them had ever been pointed at me with love. The first time Ben took me to dinner at his parents' house, I sat in the driveway for a minute rehearsing angles out of habit. Then I walked into a kitchen where nobody photographed the food. Nobody moved the casserole toward the window light. His mother, Jennifer, a retired nurse of 61 with forearms that had turned 1,000 patients, handed me a peeler and said, "Potatoes wait for no one." We ate at a table with mismatched chairs. Somebody's elbow knocked over the salt and the world kept turning. After dinner, Jennifer washed and I dried, and she asked me about my week in the pediatric ward, and then she did something I had no training for. She listened to the whole answer. Every sentence. She asked a follow-up question about a detail I'd mentioned at the beginning, which meant she had been listening at the beginning. Her husband fell asleep in his chair mid-conversation, and nobody staged him, nobody captioned him, he just slept, loved, and unrecorded. When Ben's father won $200 on a scratch ticket that fall, Jennifer's response was to buy better steaks, not to film the reaction in 3 takes. It was the most ordinary evening in the world. I got in my car afterward, made it 2 blocks, and had to pull over on a dark street because I was crying and could not for the life of me tell you why. I'm a doctor. I know now what that was. That was a starving person's body reacting to a normal meal. Not to a feast. To a family-sized portion of being seen, served without a lens, and my system simply didn't know how to absorb it. Jennifer Anderson never tried to replace my mother. Remember that too. She just stood, quietly, in the exact spot where a mother goes. Ben proposed to me on a cool evening at Hollow Bough Orchard, half an hour outside Burlington, between 2 rows of apple trees with the lights strung low. He asked with his thumbs shaking. I said yes with cider on my breath. For 48 hours it belonged to us, and I drafted careful little texts to aunts and college friends, wanting to tell people in the right order, the human order. I never got to send them. I found out my engagement had been announced while I was at work, when a 7-year-old patient's mother congratulated me in the exam room, holding up her phone. There it was, my mother's account. A screenshot of the private text I'd sent my parents. My actual words with my actual typo, under a banner of confetti emojis. Our baby is engaged. Below that, a link. Similar ring styles, tap to shop. 40,000 likes and climbing. My mother had turned the most private sentence of my life into inventory in under 2 days, and she'd tagged a jeweler I'd never met. I called her from the parking garage. She was thrilled I'd seen it. Great engagement, she said, meaning the metrics. That night, Ben held my hand across his kitchen table and asked me one question that redrew the whole map. Forget who's watching. What do you want to remember? And out of my mouth came a wedding I'd never dared to say out loud. Small. 70 people. At the orchard where he'd asked. And no phones, no posts, no cameras except one kind, which I'll get to, because that plastic detail ends up carrying this entire story. My mother heard the words unplugged wedding and called it, on the family group chat, a declaration of war. She had no idea she'd win it for me. 6 months later, that little rule would be the reason her whole stage came down. Quick question, from someone who learned it the hard way. Have you ever found out news about your own life from somebody's post? Tell me in the comments, because when you hear what my mother chose over my wedding, I want you to remember this engagement announcement. It was never about the ring. We planned a small wedding the way you'd plan a field hospital. Modestly, by hand, with people we trusted. October at the orchard. 70 guests. My colleague's bluegrass band, Jennifer's garden dahlias, a barn with a plank floor Ben sanded himself over 3 weekends. My mother treated every detail like an opening offer. She called it negotiating. I have chart notes from those calls more or less. 1 videographer, Faye. Just 1, we'll keep him invisible. When I said no, 1 getting ready reel then, 30 seconds, tasteful. No. Honey, a bridal brand will comp the whole dress. It's free. Do you know what this dress content is worth in October? No, Mom. Each refusal landed on her face the same way, and I want to describe it precisely, because it's the key to everything that came later. She didn't look hurt. She looked bewildered, and then she looked frightened. The way a person looks when you propose turning off a machine they're plugged into. At some point she said, 70 guests and no cameras, sweetheart. That's not a wedding. That's a rumor. And once, near the end of a long call, her voice dropped its brightness and she said, if we don't post it, it's like it never. And then she caught herself and stopped. But we both heard the rest of that sentence. We'd been living inside it since 2009. I hung up and stood in my kitchen and understood clinically what I was to her now. I had stopped being the spine. A spine is useful. I had become something far more dangerous to a performing family, an event with no content value. And in their economy, you don't attend those. You schedule over them. Which is exactly, on the last weekend of October, what they did. One more piece explains that weekend. Simply the Shaws was dying, and only 4 people on Earth knew. Not scandal dying. Math dying. The platform had changed its algorithm twice in a year, and my mother's warm dinner table format, the one that had paid the mortgage since 2009, stopped being served to strangers. Views that used to land in the high 6 figures were scraping along at a tenth of that. Her followers were aging with her, and advertisers know exactly how old your audience is, down to the decimal. 2 of her 3 anchor sponsors had gone quiet about renewal, and their contracts carried the family's health insurance the way a single bolt carries a bridge. My father, Rick, 60 years old, part cameraman, part bookkeeper, had started doing the thing he does when he's terrified, which is narrating spreadsheets in a calm voice at the dinner table. I heard it on a rare Sunday call. Engagement's soft, Deb. CPMs are down. We need a win before the end of the quarter. My mother wasn't sleeping. Kylie told me, back when Kylie still told me things, that Mom sat up until 2 in the morning refreshing analytics, watching a red line sink, whispering, come on, like a gambler at a cold machine. I felt sorry for her. I want that on the record. I know what it looks like when a person is being crushed by the thing that saved them, and my mother was being crushed. So when an email landed in her inbox that October with the subject line, Weekend Collab Opportunity, Silver Pines Lodge, all expenses comped, exposure to a younger demographic, deliverables due Sunday night, she didn't read it the way you or I would. She read it the way a drowning woman reads the word rope. Here's the part that still aches in cold weather. I asked Kylie to be my maid of honor. Understand what I was really asking? My sister and I had never once had a thing that was ours, no inside jokes that weren't captions, no memory that didn't have a version with better lighting. She was 26 and had been a public figure since age 9, a person whose childhood tantrums had view counts. I asked her over pancakes, just us, no phones on the table, and for a second I watched something wake up in her face. She said, "Really? Me?" And her voice was 9 years old. She said she'd think about the dress. She used the word ours, and I drove home lighter than I'd been in months. Then my mother announced the Silver Pines trip, cast list, whole family, non-negotiable, deliverables, due Sunday. The same weekend as the wedding. I know now, from my father, that Kylie pushed back for a full day, which for Kylie was a revolution. Then the machine did what it does. Contracts were mentioned. The word team was deployed. Mom cried, which on our family set is a directing technique. And on Thursday night my phone lit up with a text from my only sister that I can still recite. "It's just one weekend, Faye. Your thing is small anyway." I read it maybe 30 times, and underneath the flash of hurt, my clinical brain flagged something quieter, a finding I couldn't unsee. The message had no exclamation points. Kylie, who ended grocery lists with 3 of them. What I heard in that flat little sentence wasn't cruelty. It was exhaustion, the bone-deep kind, the sound of a woman reading lines she no longer believed. Hold on to that. Her story isn't over. I made one last house call. 2 weekends before the wedding, I drove the 2 hours down to Albany on a Sunday, sat at the table where the ring light lives, with the reflector I used to hold still propped in its corner, and asked my mother, plainly, to choose. I said, "It's my wedding, Mom." I didn't raise my voice. In my job, the more serious it gets, the quieter I get, and I have never been quieter. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand, warm as anything, and said, "And it's our livelihood, sweetheart. The lodge deadline is Sunday, it can't move. We'll celebrate you properly after, with good light, a real shoot, hair and makeup, golden hour. You'll thank me when you see the photos." There it was. My wedding, downgraded to raw footage, a rough cut we'd fix in the reshoot. I looked at my father, who was cleaning a lens with the concentration of a man diffusing something, and he did not look up. Rickshaw hasn't taken an unposed photograph since the first Obama administration, and he wasn't about to start with eye contact. Here's the confession that matters, though. When I got home, Ben asked how it went, and I said, "They might be late. There's a work thing." Might be late. 20 years of training doesn't vanish because you're angry. I was still the family's editor, still cutting their worst takes before anyone could see them, still protecting the audience of one man I loved from the truth about the people who made me. Remember that lie? I had to unlearn it in public. And one more detail because it becomes important. They never declined the invitation. The RSVP card came back marked yes, all three names, because in my mother's business you never put a cancellation in writing. Canceling has optics. Simply not showing up, apparently, does not. The rehearsal dinner was Friday night at a farmhouse restaurant near the orchard. 22 people around one long table. 3 chairs at the end sat empty. The Shaws were, per the group chat, stuck in traffic, which would have been more convincing if my mother's account hadn't posted a packing video that afternoon. Cashmere and canvas totes, captioned adventure calls. I watched Ben's college roommate glance at the empty chairs, then at me, then develop a sudden fascination with the breadbasket. That specific kindness, people pretending not to notice your wound, is its own kind of pain. I was reaching for my water glass and my speech, the smoothing over speech I'd been giving for 2 decades. My parents are just so busy, when Jennifer Anderson stood up from the far end of the table. She didn't say a word about traffic. She picked up her plate, her silverware, and her wine, walked the length of that table, and sat down in the empty chair beside me as if it had held her name card all along. She smelled like rosemary and drugstore hand cream. She put her hand over mine, briefly, the way nurses do, a touch with a purpose and a dosage, and she leaned in and said quietly, "So it belonged only to us. I'm not here to be seen, honey. I'm here to see you." Then she asked me to pass the salt and started telling a story about Ben's first bicycle, and the table laughed, and dinner simply went on around the hole in it. I got through the toasts. I smiled at the right times, but somewhere under my ribs, a lifelong belief, the one that said you have to earn your seat at every table, quietly lay down and stopped breathing. It would be fully dead by Saturday night. The morning, though. The morning came first. Now I have to show you the basket because everything that happens later happens because of it. It was Ben's idea, or really his family's tradition, 3 generations old. At Anderson weddings, there is a wicker basket on a table at the entrance to the reception, next to a crate of disposable film cameras, the plastic kind you wind with a ratchety little click. The rule is printed on a card in Jennifer's handwriting. Phones sleep in the basket. Cameras go with you. Shoot whatever you love. We develop what was real. No screens, no deleting, no retakes, no checking whether you blinked. 27 frames of faith per person. Jennifer told me her mother started it in the 70s for the opposite problem, camera-shy farmers who wouldn't be in pictures at all, and the tradition just kept working as the disease reversed. The night before the wedding, after the dishes, Ben put one of those cameras in my hand. It weighed nothing. It cost, I later learned, about $11. I turned it over and shook it gently, and it made a small sound. Film against plastic, a dry, papery rattle, and I want you to remember that sound, because it's the smallest sound in this story and the most important one. No storage, no audience, no numbers, just a roll of film that would come back from the lab as whatever the day had actually been, blurry, crooked, true. I stood in my kitchen holding $11 of honesty, and I thought about my mother's $40,000 camera rig, and I laughed. Once. Alone. I didn't know yet that I'd remember that plastic camera as the hinge my whole life turned on. It would end up mattering more than any phone in that basket, including mine, especially mine. But first, Saturday morning, and 2 chairs with ribbon on them, and a phone call I will be hearing for the rest of my life. The wedding morning was the kind of October day Vermont invents to show off. Cold gold light, apples still on the high branches. In the front row, 2 chairs wore cream ribbon and a small card in my handwriting. Family. My family had been due at 9 for coffee and getting ready, and all the small backstage rituals mothers are supposed to hover through. At 9:40, the gravel lot was filling with vendor vans and bridesmaids' cars, and theirs was not among them. At 10:40, my calls went to voicemail, and I stood at the bridal suite window doing the math I do professionally. Albany is 2 hours out. If they left now, they'd still make the ceremony. And underneath the math, the older, stupider program still running. They're just late. They're always late. Breathe. At 11:15, my mother finally picked up. I can report the call almost verbatim, because some audio your brain files under permanent. Me. Mom, thank God. Are you okay? Where are you? A pause. A pause with a smile in it. Then my mother's voice. Bright, unhurried, genuinely amused. Oh, was that today? A trip sounded more fun. Behind her, unmistakable, my sister's laugh, the on-camera one, the one she's had since she was 9. And behind the laugh, a sound I recognized from 100 sponsored posts, the steady thunder of a spa waterfall. They weren't lost. They weren't hurt. They were at Silver Pines Lodge in robes, 90 minutes away, filming deliverables during my wedding. I looked at myself in the mirror, a doctor in a white dress, and I felt the strangest thing happen, which was nothing. No scream built in me. Flat calm came down like a surgical drape. I said, "Okay, Mom." Nothing more, and I meant every bit of it. Then I hung up, set the phone face down on the vanity, and sat very still, because I had 11 minutes to decide who I was going to be. I sat in the bridal suite with my hands flat on the white dress and let it be true. For 11 minutes I didn't move, didn't call anyone back, didn't draft a single text in my head. If you want to know how long 11 minutes is, it's about the length of a cardiac arrest code. Long enough for a whole team to fight for a life. Long enough to call it. Somewhere in minute 9, I stopped defending the patient. Not my family. The story I'd carried about my family, the one where they'd come through at the end, the one I'd been resuscitating single-handed for 20 years. I let the flat line be a flat line. And the strange mercy was what remained when the noise stopped. Outside my window, 70 people who had driven and flown and taken shifts off to sit in white chairs for me. The problem, said the small triage voice I trust with lives, is not that no one loves you. It's 2 empty chairs in the front row, and chairs can be filled. There was a knock. Jennifer came in, took one look at my face, and did not ask what happened, which told me she already knew. She didn't hug me, didn't hand me a tissue, didn't say anything about my mother at all. She stood there in her good blue dress, this retired nurse with 40 years of other people's worst days in her hands, and she said, "The seats won't be empty, if you'll allow it." That was the whole speech. I said, "Allow what?" And Jennifer Anderson smiled with exactly half her mouth, pulled a folded paper list from her handbag, and asked me a question that made no sense at 11:26 in the morning and made perfect sense by noon. "Honey, how many of your kids live within half an hour of this orchard?" We started 20 minutes late and nobody ever printed a program, so nobody ever knew. I won't pretend I floated down the aisle unbothered. Walking toward the man you love past the seats your parents chose to skip is a specific kind of split screen, and I lived both halves of it. Dr. Alvarez, the attending who trained me, who once talked me through my first lost patient in a stairwell at 3 in the morning, met me at the top of the rows of chairs and offered his arm. "I've watched you walk into harder rooms," he said, and walked me halfway, and then, by design, stepped aside, because Jennifer was standing at the front on the groom's side, and her being there did the rest. The orchard did what orchards do in late October. Wind moved through the high branches, and every few minutes an apple let go somewhere behind the guests with a soft knock against the grass, and people smiled at it, like the trees were participating. Nobody held up a single glowing rectangle, not one. 70 faces, unobstructed, actually there, a sight so rare in my life that I nearly lost my composure at the sheer nakedness of it. Ben, who is not a man of speeches, shook through most of his vows, and then landed the one sentence he'd clearly been carrying for months. You've spent your whole life off camera. I plan to spend mine looking straight at you. Reader, I made a sound that was not dignified. The efficient said what efficients say. We kissed, and 70 people made the noise 70 people make, and no algorithm anywhere on earth was informed. And when we turned around to face the crowd as married people, I finally let myself look, really look, at the front row, at who was sitting in my family's chairs. The moment I nodded, Jennifer Anderson walked to the parking lot, phone in hand, and worked down a list she'd apparently been keeping for 2 years without telling me. Every family who had ever pressed her hand at a holiday party, or cornered Ben at the grocery store, and said some version of, "If Dr. Shaw ever needs anything, you call us." It turns out that when you spend your career catching other people's children, a net quietly builds itself under you. Jennifer had simply gone and shaken it. The 2 ribbon chairs and the row beside them were full. Marisol sat on the aisle in her church dress, already crying in the productive, unashamed way she cries, and next to her, in a small navy suit and a blue bow tie, sat a 10-year-old boy with a full head of hair he'd fought 2 wars to keep. Theo, the 4-year-old who'd come to me blue and swelling, the 6-year-old whose blood work I hadn't liked, the kid who rang the bell at the end of chemo so hard the nurses still talk about it. 10 now, in remission, taller every scan, and sitting front row center at my wedding in the seat marked family. Behind him, 4 more families from the ward, parents whose worst nights I had stood inside, kids I'd stitched and dosed and read to, all of them scrubbed and beaming and slightly confused about the dress code, all of them there, on barely an hour's notice, for me. When the officiant presented us, it was Theo who stood up first to clap, popping off that chair like the future getting to its feet, and the whole orchard followed him. I stood in the applause and understood something with total clarity. My mother had measured this day and found it had no audience worth showing up for. She was wrong about the count. The audience of my life had simply RSVP'd to a different address, and I hadn't posted a thing. Yet. Before the storm hits, let me say this. If somebody ever filled an empty chair for you, a neighbor, a nurse, a friend who just showed up, go tell them in the comments. Name them. Because the second half of this story is about what happens when the people who should have been in those chairs saw who was. After the ceremony came the portraits, out between the apple rows, where the early afternoon light had gone the color of cider. The photographer, Jennifer's niece, shot film only, and she posed nobody. She just followed the kids and me around while my white dress collected a green hem of Vermont grass, and Theo taught me a handshake with too many steps, and Jennifer laughed until she had to hold her hat. At some point I walked to the entrance table, alone, and stood over the wicker basket where 70 phones lay sleeping. Mine was near the edge. Here is exactly what I did, and exactly what I did not do. Because the difference is the whole story. I took my phone out for the first time since the vanity that morning. I opened my camera roll and chose one frame the photographer had snapped on my own phone at my request. Just one. Me in the grass-stained dress, Theo on my arm mid-laugh, Marisol and the Ward families around us, Jennifer's hand visible on my shoulder like a rank insignia. I posted it to my little Facebook page, the one with colleagues and cousins and college roommates on it. No location. No tags, no hashtags, no mention of anyone who wasn't in the frame. Just one short line I'd been drafting, without knowing it, since the science fair. Everyone who mattered made it. Then I pressed post, watched the bar fill, and dropped the phone back into the basket like a stone into a well. 2 minutes, start to finish. I did not check it once for the rest of the night, and that's not a boast. It's the point. For the first time in my life, I had published something true, and I felt no need to watch it perform. Somewhere 90 minutes north, a geotag was already ticking like a device. I hadn't set it. My mother had. Now I have to show you the other screen, the one I wasn't watching. While I'd been getting married, my mother had been working, because the lodge deal had Sunday deliverables, and my mother has never missed a deadline in her life. Only a daughter. Her account posted all afternoon. A reel of the three of them clinking champagne on a cedar deck, robes monogrammed, captioned "So grateful for spontaneous family time." A carousel by the waterfall spa, the same waterfall I'd heard behind her laugh. And every single post carried the tag her sponsors require, bright as a flare. Silver Pines Lodge, with the platform's automatic timestamp underneath. Timestamps that landed precisely inside the hour of my wedding ceremony. She had, in effect, documented her own alibi and published it. Meanwhile, my one photograph was quietly traveling. A night shift nurse shared it with a caption about doctors who show up. A college roommate shared it. Marisol shared it to her church group with a paragraph of Spanish and a wall of exclamation points. And church groups, I have since learned, are the fastest network ever built. By early evening, it had drifted, as public things drift, into feeds that also followed simply the Shaws, because Vermont is small, and my last name is on both accounts. And at 5 minutes past, a stranger, a longtime follower of my mother's named for her own grandmother, did the simple arithmetic and posted it as a comment. Wait, the Shaws were at a spa today? Their oldest daughter got married today. Look at the timestamps. Is nobody going to talk about this? One comment. That's the entire conspiracy. I never wrote a word, never tagged a soul. I'd spent 20 years editing my family's story, and my one act of revenge, if you want to call it that, was retiring. The internet turned out to be a very motivated replacement. What happened next happened in two places at once, and I love that I have to reconstruct one of them from screenshots, because I genuinely wasn't there. At the orchard, the band played, and I danced with my husband under string lights while the trees dropped the occasional apple like slow applause. No notifications reached the party. 70 phones slept in a basket, and none of us knew we were the eye of anything. Online, in that same hour, my mother's comment section caught fire from a single match. The timestamp comment got replies, and then the replies got replies. Longtime followers, women who had watched Kylie grow up, women who'd sent casseroles by mail in 2009, started doing their own arithmetic and posting it, hurt, in real time. Someone found my photo and read my caption out loud to the room, so to speak. Everyone who mattered made it, and the phrase did what true sentences do in public. It detonated on contact. A parenting page with 200,000 followers posted a screenshot side by side, spa reel left, wedding photo right, timestamps circled in red, titled, "We need to talk about the Shaws." Two of my mother's sponsor brands got tagged into the comments so many times their social teams flagged it internally before dinner, and one posted the corporate shrug that reads, in brand language, as distancing. We're aware of the conversation and are looking into it. I want to be precise about the mechanics here, because it matters to me. Nobody hacked anyone. Nobody lied. Every pixel of that fire was fueled by content my mother posted herself, on a schedule she chose, with a geotag her contract required. All I did was hold still and be visibly, verifiably real one time. It turns out that's the one move a spin machine can't counter. At 6 o'clock, at Silver Pines Lodge, 90 minutes from my reception, my mother finally looked at her phone with her manager's eyes instead of her audience's. I know this scene from my father, who told me months later in a parking lot, in a voice like a man describing a car crash from the inside. 19 missed calls from her manager, a text from her biggest sponsor, the insurance-adjacent one with the morality clause, reading only, "Call us tonight." The channel dashboard, that red line she'd been nursing at 2 in the morning, suddenly spiking, the wrong kind of up, comments arriving faster than the app could load them. My mother stood in a monogrammed robe in a $2,000 suite that hadn't cost her anything except everything, scrolling with her thumb like a woman trying to bail water. It was Kylie who said it first. My sister, the face of the channel, 17 years on camera, read the top comment, and the color left her so fast my father reached for her elbow. She said, "Mom, they know. Everyone knows." And my father, Rick Shaw, a man who has weighed every sentence for its optics since 2009, said the only unproduced thing he'd said in years, quietly, to the window, "I told you we should have gone." My mother did not answer. She was already packing, phone wedged against her ear, leaving a voicemail for her manager in her bright voice, the bright voice cracking down the middle like lake ice. They left the robes on the bed and the deliverables unfinished, and pointed the SUV south. 90 minutes of dark road between the lodge and Hollowbough Orchard. 90 minutes to draft a strategy. My family has never once driven 90 minutes without producing something. Remember that, as the headlights get closer. Back at the orchard, we were at the part of the reception where the plank floor finally earns its sanding. The band had figured out the crowd. Somebody's uncle was doing a dance that predated the internet entirely, and the disposable cameras were popping their tiny flashes all over the barn like fireflies with opinions. Theo appeared at my elbow, bow tie rotated 90 degrees, and asked, with the formality of a boy who had clearly rehearsed with his mother, whether he could have this dance. The band saw him and dropped into something slow. So I danced with a 10-year-old leukemia survivor standing on the toes of my ruined shoes, and the whole floor clapped time, and his mother filmed absolutely none of it. And it happened anyway, fully, completely, in front of everyone whose eyes mattered. When the song ended, Theo bowed like a diplomat and informed me it was the best wedding he'd been to. Out of, he clarified. 1. Jennifer found me by the cider table after, holding 2 glasses. She wasn't smiling exactly. She had her triage face on, the one I recognized, because I own one. She'd stepped out to her car for her wrap and glanced at her phone, the one phone excused from the basket in case the caterer called, and being a fair woman, she gave it to me straight. The internet had found the timestamps. The storm was enormous and growing, and a car was probably already on its way. Then she touched her glass to mine and said the sentence I'd like stitched somewhere permanent. Whatever comes through that gate tonight, you've already had your wedding. Nobody can repossess it. I looked at the gate. String lights, gravel, dark orchard beyond. 20 minutes later, it filled with headlights. The headlights swept the apple rows like a searchlight, finding no one to arrest, and gravel popped under the tires, and the music didn't stop. But conversations did, one table at a time, in a wave that ran from the gate to the cake. Car doors. Then my parents were standing at the entrance to my reception, just outside the reach of the string lights, and I got my first look at their faces. I'm going to describe them clinically because clinical is what I had left. As a doctor, I know what shock looks like. Pale, damp, pupils wide, the facial muscles slack, because all available blood has been recalled for more essential business. My parents were in shock. Textbook. Both of them. Just not the kind that comes from love. Nobody looks like that because they missed a daughter. People look like that when the ground disappears, and their ground was a number, and it was in freefall in my mother's hand, which had not released her phone, I noted, even to close the car door. My mother wore the lodge's cashmere and yesterday's blowout. My father wore the expression of a man doing arithmetic he can't stop. And behind them, half out of the headlights, stood Kylie, mascara relocated to her cheekbones, hugging her own elbows, looking at the party, at the lights, at the kids in their church clothes, with an expression I had never seen on my sister's famous face. It took me a second to place it, and then I did. She looked like a viewer. Outside the show, watching something she wasn't in. 70 guests were now performing the American ritual of pretending not to stare. Ben's hand found the small of my back and asked a silent question. I answered it by walking, alone, unhurried, a bride crossing her own party, toward the gate and whatever my family had produced on the drive. My mother did not open with sorry. I want that in the record. Not for cruelty, for accuracy. She opened like a woman running a crisis call, because that is precisely what she was doing, and her firstborn was the account she needed access to. She kept her voice low, aware of the guests at the edge of earshot, and she led with the ask. Faye, thank God. Okay, listen, we don't have much time. You need to take the post down. People are getting the wrong idea. It's completely out of context, and it is spreading. I remember admiring distantly the efficiency. No hello, no congratulations. My wedding day had finally acquired content value, and the content was afire, and I was the extinguisher. She pressed on, and here was the plan, whole and polished, drafted somewhere on 90 minutes of dark road. I delete my photograph. Then tonight, one new photo. All 5 of us, in front of the string lights, smiling, my dress prominently in frame. She posts it with a caption she recited to me from memory, and I promise you this is close to verbatim. Our girl surprised us by moving up the timeline. We raced back from a family anniversary getaway the second we heard. Best plot twist ever. One photo fixes this, she said. One. Then it's a misunderstanding. The brands calm down. Everyone moves on, and honey, tomorrow we will celebrate you so hard. The phone in her hand never stopped lighting, little pulses against her palm like a second heartbeat, and each pulse tightened her voice another quarter turn, because every minute this stayed unanswered, the story hardened somewhere she couldn't reach. That pressure was real, by the way. I don't mock it. Contracts were dying in her pocket as we stood there, and then my father stepped in close. Rick Shaw, 60 years old, quieter than I'd ever heard him, and said the true version underneath the whole performance. Faye, honey, the house is in that contract. The insurance. It's not. It was never. And he stopped. Because there's no good end to that sentence. My mother said, Rick, the way you'd say down to a dog. And they both looked at me, waiting for the editor. I didn't answer right away, and my silence did something to my mother that refusal never had. It broke her rhythm. And out of the crack came the realest thing I have ever heard her say. Her voice lost its produced warmth, dropped half an octave into a register I hadn't heard since 2009, and she said, You don't remember what it was like. You were a child. The bank was going to take the house, Faye. Your father was unemployed and I was invisible. And the audience, those strangers you resent so much, they paid our mortgage. They paid for your braces. They kept the lights on while you studied your way out. This channel fed you. Her eyes were shining, and none of it was performance. And that was the terrible part. I am not allowed to let it die, do you understand me? I have never once been allowed to put it down. And for one long second I saw my mother whole, maybe for the first time. 58 years old, standing in Lodge Cashmere at the edge of her daughter's wedding, holding a phone that was detonating in slow motion, a woman who had built a life raft in 2009 and then never again been permitted to reach the shore. The machine she operated her. I felt the pity arrive, real pity, the kind with weight. I let it stand next to everything else, and I did not let it decide. When I spoke the way I speak to frightened families in small rooms, slow and level and unmistakable. I'm not taking the post down, Mom, it's true, it's staying up. And I'm not going to pose for the other one because it isn't. She started to speak and I raised 2 fingers, gently, off my thigh, and something in her actually paused. But I'm not sending you away either. Look. I turned and nodded toward the entrance table, 10 steps away, where the wicker basket sat under the string lights among 70 sleeping phones. You can stay, all 3 of you. There's cake, there's a band. Your daughter got married today, and the night's not over. I held her eyes. Phones in the basket. Come in as people, not as a page. An invitation, not an ultimatum. The door. Open. And then I watched my mother look at that basket. What happened next took 4 seconds, and it is the reason I'm telling this story. My mother looked at the basket. She looked down at the phone in her hand. Screen firing, notifications stacking on notifications, her whole collapsing kingdom pulsing against her fingers. She looked back at the basket, and her hand would not open. I don't mean she considered it and declined. I mean, I watched a physical negotiation fail, watched her thumb whiten against the case, watched the tendons in the back of her hand ready themselves for release and then refuse. The way I've seen fists refuse at bedsides when it's time to let something go. The basket was 10 steps away. It might as well have been across a canyon with no bridge, and my father, the bridge engineer, stood right there, and even he couldn't have spanned it. I watched my mother try to put her phone in a basket and fail. That was the whole story of my childhood. in 4 seconds. Every empty chair, every reshoot of every breakfast, every ribbon that never got posted, all of it compressed into one hand that could not open around one lit rectangle. And here's what happened inside me, the part I didn't expect. The last cell of a lifelong belief died painlessly. I'd always told the story as, they cropped me out. Standing at that gate, I finally saw my own hands on the crop tool. I'd cut myself out of frame after frame, made myself small, useful, invisible, so that their picture would work. And I'd called it love. And it was a role like any other. And I was done playing it. My father touched my mother's shoulder. She turned, and they walked back toward the car, and neither of them said goodbye, because there was no camera to say it for. Kylie stood at the gate a moment longer, one foot on the gravel, one on the grass, eyes going from me to the party to the basket. Then she followed them. I stood absolutely still, in my wedding dress, in front of 70 witnesses, and let my family choose the screen. The engine started. The headlights swung. I did not run after the car. It was the most expensive standing still of my life, and I would do it again. The taillights shrank between the apple rows, and I turned around to face my own wedding. 70 faces, arranged in that careful national expression of we saw nothing, and behind them the band, frozen mid-decision, the fiddle player's bow hovering over the strings like a question mark. I caught the bandleader's eye. I nodded once, and the music came back, a little too loud on purpose, the way good friends turn up the radio past a hard mile, and the floor refilled. And my wedding, remarkable thing, simply resumed, because real things resume. Ben reached me first and didn't say a word, just pressed his forehead to mine for one long breath in the dark past the lights, which is a complete sentence in our language. Jennifer appeared with cake I hadn't asked for and stood at my shoulder while I ate it, on guard, the way nurses stand. And then Theo, who had watched the entire scene at the gate with the frank staring of a 10-year-old, tugged my hand and delivered his professional assessment. Your mom missed the cake. And the band? Bad choice. Out of the mouths of pediatric patients. He pulled me back onto the plank floor and the fireflies of the disposable cameras started popping again, and I danced at my wedding, grass-stained, cried on, married, free. One more thing, and then I'll let the night end, because it matters more than anything my family did. I found the groundskeeper and made a single request. The gate stayed open all night. Unlocked, unlatched, string lights burning on it till 2 a.m. That's the part I made sure of. If a car had turned around on some dark mile of Route 7, it would have found the way and lit. Nobody walked back through it, but the door I offered was real, and it stayed open longer than they stayed pale. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived from a photo lab in Montpellier, thick as a sandwich. The film from the baskets, all 20-some cameras, developed at last. We opened it on the kitchen floor like kids with a cereal prize. The pictures were, by any professional standard, terrible. Blurry, crooked, flash too close, horizons tilted, a superb series of somebody's thumb, and they were the truest photographs I have ever been handed. Theo mid-leap on the dance floor, tie fully sideways, a blur of joy with one sharp laughing eye. Jennifer caught off guard, head back, hat in her hand, laughing with her whole medical history. Dr. Alvarez slow dancing with Marisol, both of them dignified and terrible at it. And one frame, photographer unknown to this day, of Ben and me at the cider table, not posing, not touching, just looking at each other the way you look when you think no one's watching, which, for once, no one was. We bought an album, a physical one with sticky pages, and it lives on our bookshelf. And it is posted nowhere, and it will never be posted anywhere. One single picture, the one of Theo midair, went up on the refrigerator under a magnet shaped like Vermont. My mother's constitution said if it isn't posted, it didn't happen. I look at that refrigerator every morning over coffee, and every morning it files the same quiet dissent. It wasn't posted. It happened anyway. Here's the aftermath, measured, because I'm a doctor and we chart outcomes, not feelings. The sponsor with the morality clause invoked it within the week, cancelled outright. 2 more brands announced a pause, which is brand for backing away without sudden movements. Channel revenue dropped by more than half in a single quarter. Nobody went hungry, and nobody lost the house. But the SUV with the channel's name in the paperwork got sold, and my parents began, for the first time since 2009, living at approximately their actual size. My mother did what my mother does. She made content of the wreckage. The channel pivoted to what she calls her healing era, and 3 weeks after the wedding she posted a 19-minute tearful vlog titled My Daughter's Wedding, Our Side. I lasted 4 minutes, which was long enough to hear myself described as struggling with boundaries, and then I closed the laptop, and I want you to hear what I did next. Nothing. No rebuttal, no comment, no correction. The old Faye would have drafted her mother's apology for her by midnight. I just went to bed. Retirement, it turns out, is a practice. The comment section, I'm told, did not buy the vlog, but the loyal core stayed because some audience always stays, and the machine ground on at its new, smaller size. And then, in early December, one text from my father. No preamble, no spin, and no ask for a do-over photo, which is how I knew it was really him. The picture's on your fridge. Marisol showed your aunt one at church. Could you print me one? I stood in my kitchen and read it several times. Then I printed the frame of Theo mid-air, wrote nothing on the back, sealed it, stamped it, and mailed it to Albany. No letter, no caption. I'm told he keeps it in his wallet. The first unposted photograph my father has owned in 17 years. It's a start. It's not nothing. And then there's my sister. One evening in January, deep in the blue Vermont cold, my doorbell rang, and Kylie was standing on my porch with snow in her hair. No phone in her hand, none visible anywhere on her person, which for Kylie was practically a medical event. Hair in a low ponytail, face bare, and in her eyes the particular jet lag of someone who has just powered down after 17 years on air. She'd left the channel, I'd heard. Moved out, gone back to school for early childhood education, made her personal account private for the first time since age 9. She didn't explain any of that on the porch. She just stood there with her hands in her pockets and said, "Can I just be here?" Those words. Nothing else. I opened the door. I put the kettle on, and she drifted through my kitchen and stopped in front of the refrigerator, in front of Theo flying sideways through the frame under the Vermont magnet. And she looked at that blurry photograph for a very long time. Then my sister said quietly, "I don't remember the last time we took a picture nobody needed. We're working on it. Off camera, where the real ones develop." If my story leaves you with one thing, let it be this. The realest moments of your life will never trend, and they don't have to.